Hi everybody, and welcome to this fly tying tutorial. The pattern that I'm going to be tying today is called the Sculpin bugger. It's by no means the most creative name. You basically take a Sculpin, which I'll be telling you about in a second, combine that with a woolly bugger, a really very popular streamer type pattern that represents everything and nothing at the same time. Put them together and you get the Sculpin bugger. So let me first tell you a little bit about the Sculpin, and I am by no means a biologist, but I can tell you some generalizations about them. The two main types that you're going to be representing in North America are known as the mottled Sculpin and the slimy Sculpin. They're typically found in really fast-moving water, and they're really found on the bottom as well. So you want to make sure this is a weighted fly. Their length is typically, we'll say, between 2 and 3 inches, though they have been found upwards of 4 to 5 inches. So kind of think about that while you're tying this pattern. They're known for a really broad, flat head. And one way to easily mimic that is to get this product that's put out by the flymanfishingcompany.org, and they're called Sculpin helmets. I'll show you what these look like. They're found in brown and olive colors. You can buy them in those. They come with eyes. You just pop on 2 eyes to each of these helmets, and when you're finished tying the fly, you basically super glue this over the eye of the hook. It's a really slick product. They're nice and heavy, so they get your fly down to the bottom, plus they look just like a Sculpin head. Another feature of the Sculpin is that they have a thin tapering body that comes up from the tail. So don't be afraid to really leave that back section really thin and try to build it up as you work towards the head of the fly. In fact, when I'm using my hackle, I'm going to be tying it in by the tip first and letting the butt section of the hackle really build up by the head of this Sculpin. They also have a wing-like pectoral fin, and their tails also almost looks like a quarter because it's just really flat and rounded as it goes back. The one thing to keep in mind is that the pattern I'm tying today will be a mocha colored, a light brown color for the body. And during breeding season, the male Sculpins will actually get much darker, almost to the color black. So if you are carrying some tan ones, that's great if they represent your natural, but you may want to also throw some darker brown and some black ones in your boxes too, just to make sure you have all of your bases covered. The final piece that I want to mention, I'm going to be using some new hackle today. I got it from a guy named Joel Alsdorf. Hopefully I'm saying Joel's name correctly, his last name. He owns a company called Alsdorf Genetic. It is alsdorfgenetic.com. Maybe I'll put a little link to it in my description of this pattern. I met Joel at a recent fly fishing show. He's just getting into the hackle business. I bought a bunch of stuff off him. I probably should have bought more, but I think we all have been in that situation before. So I just want to throw a quick shout out to Joel. Joel, thanks for selling me that stuff. I'm going to be using that bugger saddle you sold me today. It just looks awesome on this pattern. All right, with that said, let me get to this pattern. I'm first going to show you one that I've already tied. I'll go over a few of the details of the actual pattern. Then I'll get into the fly tying tutorial for the Sculpin bugger. All right, here's a quick look at the finished Sculpin bugger. Looking at it from the back to the front, we have some grizzly marabou. It's a nice brown grizzly marabou that I have in here, and I want to keep it so it's almost more of a flatter sense. I'll talk a little bit about the length of the tail whenever I get there. I'm tying this on a 4XL hook. So it's nice and large. I believe this is a size 8 or a size 6. Big is definitely not a bad thing for this pattern. You can see my hackle as it's gone up, and whenever I got close to the head, I actually wound a few extra turns of that hackle. So whenever I put on this Sculpin helmet, it kicked these hackles back, almost giving it a sense of another fin on that side. I'll talk a little bit about my crystal flash type chenille as I get to that part of the body. Then you can definitely see this Sculpin helmet. There are eyes that come whenever you purchase these. All you have to do is stick them on and put this helmet on, which I'll explain as I'm actually getting into the tutorial for the pattern. And then finally, I did add a couple rubber legs to this one. I have some, I think they're brown or black. It's a darker color rubber leg with some red fleckling on it, or speckling. I honestly just got that rubber from just like a little bass skirting, nothing crazy. You can find these at some you can find these for very little amount of money. But what was nice about this one, it's just red, it's a darker color, a brown color. There's some thicker pieces, and there's also some smaller pieces. This skirting might cost 25 cents, maybe 50 cents. It's just used again for some bass lures. So this is a look at one of the finished Sculpin buggers. So let me now get into the actual pattern for you. All right, let's start tying this Sculpin bugger. For starters, I'm going to be using a 3/0 brown colored thread. I'm just going to tie it on right near the eye of the hook. Build up the body. We'll say I'm really just building up the shank of the hook. I'm going to cut this one. It's a little trickier to tear 3/0. I'm going to go about to that point. Oops. I'm going to go about to the point where I'm really close to the hook point. Then I'm going to tie in my tail. Now, I'm going to be using this brown grizzly, or we could call it grizzly brown marabou. It's got some, you can see that coloration in it, the black and the brown specks. You typically will only need one feather if you have decent feathers for this. If you really like extra marabou and you want to throw in a second feather, you may do that to really build up that tail. But for my purposes, I'm only going to tie in one. I'm going to keep the feather. I don't want the feather to go flat, even though it might when it gets to the water. So I'm going to tie it in so it's almost looking like a quarter as it's sitting straight up. To measure this piece, I'm going to place it directly over the hook shank, and I want the tips to nearly be directly above the hook point, and then my thumb be at the eye. Then I'm going to place that right around that hook point. For the Sculpin pictures I have seen and the ones that I've held over the years, they typically do not have the longest tail. So I don't want to make that tail excessively long and really just make this not look like that correct pattern. I'm going to leave the majority of this piece on, the butt section. I might just trim the end, but then I'm actually just going to tie it down, not worry so much about trimming it and making sure everything's flat. Okay, as I make my way back, I'm going to tie in my hackle. I have a really nice hackle that I pulled out just for this pattern. I really like hackle that has lots of web on it still, just to give it more of that insect type look. I don't really like the very thin hackles. To tie this one in, I'm actually going to start at the tip, pull back some feathers close to the tip. I'm going to leave the tip in and just tie that tip directly in. So I have the leftovers of my hackle. The butt section was in my left hand. I'm just going to leave this little piece flap, and I can actually tie that in as I'm wrapping this forward. And then finally I'm going to tie in the body, which is just simply going to be a chenille. This is actually called Willie's Sparkle yarn. It's some really cool stuff. It's almost like a rope, and it has a bunch of crystal flash coming out of it. This is the color that he calls mocha. So you can see as I bring this over or past the camera, there's some tan spots, there's some darker brown spots. I really like that lighter brown color, that light tan color, but I do not mind that coloration because these Sculpins do have that almost that modeling sense to them. Okay, so I'm just going to tie in a little piece of this near the tail, and then just bring my thread forward. Just go over this stuff once or twice. You're not going to see it, but I do want to make sure it's relatively uniform. I'm just going to build up this section a little bit more. I'm going to put in a 1/2 hitch, and then I'll bring my my bobbin cradle around so I can use the rotary function. So I put in a 1/2 hitch so that I could use the rotary function. I'm simply going to hold this straight up and spin it around. Every 2 or so spins, I'm just going to stop and pull those fibers towards the back of the fly. Now you can see the darker section coming in. Now I don't want to get this too close to the eye of the hook because I do have to leave room for my Sculpin helmet. So about this section is where I'm going to stop. Let me get my cradle back in place. I'm just going to bring my thread up, and I'm holding all of this section in the air. I typically won't trim this off. I won't trim it into smaller sections unless I'm really tying a lot of these. I don't like to waste too much of the material. Okay, and there's on the body, it gives it that little bit of flash, and it will be covered with my hackle a little bit. Here's my hackle. We have a couple options whenever we're palmering this on, but for the most part, I'll be pulling the fibers towards me just so I can get a few more of them up in the air. What's nice about using this hackle compared to that tan body is that this hackle will really almost create a ribbing, and you can really see this hackle showing up in contrast to the body. Okay, I'm getting closer to the front, and as I get closer to the front, I might start bringing my wraps a little closer together. And right when I get to the point where I had stopped my thread, I'm going to pull back all that crystal flash and just put an excessive amount of turns here. Okay, and that's enough. You can see I've really built up a lot of hackle at the front. fact, I might wind that back just a hair. I think I may have got one too many in there. I went a little crazy for the camera, we'll see. Okay, so I have my hackle locked in now. Let me trim that out of there. I'm going to pull that back just a little bit. In the video, in the pattern I originally showed you, it had a set of rubber legs. This is the point where you would tie those rubber legs on. I'm not going to put rubber legs on this one. I was just showing that to you. Instead, I'm just going to half hitch this and then place a whip finish. Now, we're not going to put any head cement yet, and I'll show you why here in a second. Let me get that little piece out of there, and my thread is now cut. So this fly is definitely not finished yet, but based on the way that this the fish skulls work, you're going to be placing the fish skull over top of this section, but it's actually going to be forcing, based on the weight of this fish head, the eyes will be going this way. Let me get that over the eye of the hook. So the eyes are actually on the same side. They're facing up, and they're actually facing the hook point. So you want to keep that in mind when applying this on, because this is the way the hook will be riding based on the weight of this Sculpin helmet. Now, the way that the Flymen company recommends putting this on, they simply advise you to place a drop of super glue right here, place the Sculpin helmet on, then finish off the front with some thread. All right, so to do that, I have some super glue. You want to be careful when using super glue, though, because if you just put the nozzle directly over this, you could just have a ton of super glue going all over the place, and we don't want that. So I'm just going to take my bodkin, get some super glue on it. That's easy to clean off. Just get some super glue around that point. And though it is relatively fast drying, you have a little bit of time to work with. Next time I take my Sculpin helmet, I've already placed the eyes on it. I'm going to place it over the eye and up against those feathers. And then to finish this fly off, I'm going to go back to my 3/0 thread. And if you want to go to a 6/0 at this sense, you can use a 6/0 to ensure that it doesn't get built up too much by the head of the fly. Trim. Okay, and this fish head will not be moving much once you get it in there. I'm going to place some locking wraps, get a half hitch to ensure everything's locked in the way I want it. Now, if you want to push this thread back and to really get it tight against that Sculpin head, you're more than welcome to do that. Some tires I've seen, and I'll just zoom in so you can see what I'm doing here. They will really build this up in here to ensure that fish head is not going anywhere. And I don't want that moving very much at all. So I got my half hitch now. Finish it off with a whip finish. I'm going to trim my thread. And then I'm going to go back to my bodkin. I'm not going to put super glue on this time. Instead, I'm just going to place a little head cement on to finish my fly. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so now I have that head cement on there drying, and I do have my finished Sculpin. Let me flip this around in my vise so you're able to see it a little better. Okay, so this is the finished Sculpin. This is a brown Sculpin with the Sculpin helmet tied on it. You can see I have some really nice ribbing going on, which will really show that modeling effect for the Sculpin. I have my grizzly brown tail, and I have that, that crystal flash type chenille for the body, which will just give it just enough shine. Then you can see that flat profile for the head that is part of the Sculpin helmet. Again, you can find those at flymencompany.org, and I believe that is the website. I'll double check it. Sorry, flymenfishingcompany.org. All right, well, this is the finished Sculpin bugger. Thank you for viewing this tutorial. I hope you were able to pick something up from this video. Thank you, as always, for any comments or questions, and feel free to leave them directly on this YouTube page. Otherwise, you can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com. Thanks again, everybody.